Growing up, my childhood was as ordinary as it could get until the summer before I turned 12. My family had recently moved to a quaint suburban neighborhood that seemed to promise tranquility. It was the type of place where kids rode bikes until the streetlights blinked on, and parents exchanged polite smiles over freshly trimmed hedges. My father, an IT consultant, had landed a position at a growing firm, and with his new role came our new address. It was here that I first met Emma. Emma was the kind of girl everyone wanted to befriend. She was outgoing, quick-witted, and had a knack for making people laugh at the drop of a hat. Being the quieter type, I initially admired her from a distance, unsure if someone as vivacious as Emma would even notice me. To my surprise, she did. We bonded over a shared love for books and a penchant for storytelling. She was the first friend I made in the neighborhood, and for a while, it felt like we were inseparable. By the time we hit middle school, however, the dynamics began to shift. Middle school is a cauldron of simmering insecurities and social jockeying, and our friendship was no exception to the heat. Emma became the centerpiece of a growing circle of friends, while I found comfort in smaller, quieter groups. Despite the changes, our bond remained strong until the incident. The first crack in our friendship appeared during a class discussion. We had a substitute teacher who decided to veer off topic and ask us about cultural traditions in our families. What started as an innocent sharing session took an uncomfortable turn when one boy made a snide remark about my family's heritage. I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks, but before I could respond, Emma laughed. It wasn't a hearty, malicious laugh, more of an uneasy chuckle, but it felt like a betrayal. From that day forward, things were never quite the same. The social atmosphere in school was tinged with underlying tension. My classmates divided themselves into cliques, often defined by race or shared backgrounds. The jokes, the side glances, the hushed whispers, they all added to the undercurrent of animosity. Emma, who once stood beside me, seemed to drift further away with each passing week. I'd catch her exchanging quiet laughs with the very people who threw the sharpest verbal darts my way. Then came the cafeteria incident. It was a typical Friday afternoon, and the cafeteria buzzed with the hum of students eager for the weekend. I was sitting with my usual group when I noticed Emma at a nearby table. She was animatedly recounting a story, her hands gesturing wildly. The punchline of her tale was punctuated by a mocking impression of me, my accent, to be exact. The table erupted in laughter, but to me, it felt like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. That moment solidified the divide between us. I stopped trying to rekindle what we had and focused instead on surviving the social gauntlet of middle school. Emma and I became strangers who shared a history, and that history grew more bitter as the weeks turned into months. The final blow came during a school assembly when we were paired for a group project. What could have been an opportunity to mend fences turned into an exercise in passive aggression. Emma's dismissive attitude and my defensive posture ensured we accomplished little beyond widening the chasm. My father's job transfer came as a relief. When he announced we were moving to a new state, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. Leaving meant escaping the tangled web of adolescent conflict, but it also meant leaving behind the good memories of my friendship with Emma. On our last day in the neighborhood, I saw her across the street. For a moment, our eyes met, and I wondered if she felt the same weight of unresolved tension. But neither of us moved to bridge the gap. The move marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, but the scars of those years lingered. The conflicts of middle school shaped me in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. It was only years down the road, when paths unexpectedly crossed again, that I realized how deeply those events had imprinted on both of us. University was a fresh start for me. The sprawling campus, buzzing with the energy of students from all walks of life, was a stark contrast to the small-town atmosphere I had left behind. It was here that I met Michael, a senior who seemed to have everything figured out. I had been struggling to navigate the intricacies of my coursework when he first approached me in the library. What began as a casual offer to help soon turned into something much more significant. Michael had a way of making the complex seem simple. He had this calm confidence about him, the kind that made you believe he could handle anything life threw his way. At first, our interactions were strictly academic. He'd patiently explain concepts I couldn't grasp and share notes that seemed like gold mines of information. Over time, though, our conversations drifted beyond the confines of textbooks. We started talking about our favorite books, our childhoods, and our dreams for the future. It didn't take long for me to realize that Michael was more than just a helpful upperclassman. He was attentive and thoughtful in a way that caught me off guard. He noticed the little things, how I fidgeted when I was nervous, or how I always chose the same spot in the library. It was a level of attention I wasn't used to, and it was intoxicating. One evening, after a particularly grueling study session, we decided to grab coffee at a nearby cafe. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at ease. As we walked back to campus under the soft glow of streetlights, Michael mentioned his family. He spoke warmly about his younger brother and his sisters, painting a picture of a close-knit group that supported one another through thick and thin. When he mentioned Emma by name, my heart sank. The memories of middle school came rushing back, unbidden and unwelcome. There was no doubt in my mind. Emma, his sister, was the same Emma from my past. The realization left me reeling, but I kept my composure. Michael had no idea about the history Emma and I shared, and I wasn't ready to tell him. Instead, I listened as he described her in glowing terms, highlighting her intelligence and determination. It was a stark contrast to the Emma I remembered, the one who had laughed at cruel jokes and mocked me in front of our peers. Yet, hearing Michael talk about her so fondly made me question whether she had changed. Could the Emma he knew be so different from the one I had grown to resent? Over the next few weeks, my relationship with Michael deepened. Study sessions turned into late-night talks, and those talks turned into moments where silence spoke louder than words. The lines between friendship and something more began to blur, and before long, we were officially a couple. Michael had a knack for making me feel safe, both physically and emotionally. He was the kind of person who'd drop everything to be there for someone he cared about, and he made it clear that I was at the top of that list. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, he told me he wanted something serious. He wasn't interested in fleeting connections or casual flings. He wanted to build a future with someone he could trust, someone he could grow with. His words struck a chord deep within me. I had always been wary of letting people get too close, afraid of the vulnerability that came with it. But with Michael, it felt different. He had this uncanny ability to dismantle the walls I had spent years building, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself wanting to let someone in. Despite the growing depth of our relationship, a part of me couldn't shake the weight of my realization about Emma. I chose to keep the truth to myself, not wanting to disrupt the happiness I had found with Michael. But the thought of seeing her again lingered like a shadow I couldn't outrun. Little did I know, that shadow would soon come to life, bringing with it a storm I wasn't prepared to face. Meeting Michael's family was a milestone in our relationship, one that I approached with a mix of excitement and dread. Despite the warmth he always described, I couldn't ignore the shadow of Emma's presence. The moment we stepped through the front door of his family home, I felt the weight of her eyes on me, sharp and assessing. Her expression shifted briefly into one of surprise before settling into something more calculating. Whatever friendliness she reserved for others in the room, none of it was directed at me. Emma wasted no time asserting her dominance. Her words were laced with subtle barbs, cloaked in the guise of polite conversation. She brought up shared memories from their childhood, carefully excluding Michael's stories about me or anything that could make me feel included. The rest of his family, unaware of the tension simmering between us, seemed charmed by her charisma. It was a skill she had perfected long ago, and one that I hadn't forgotten. Over dinner, the passive aggression took on a sharper edge. Emma's pointed questions about my background and education were thinly veiled attempts to highlight our differences. She recounted anecdotes from her and Michael's childhood, ensuring that I felt like an outsider looking in. To anyone else, it might have seemed harmless, but I recognized the calculated precision behind her actions. The longer the evening went on, the more I felt myself withdrawing, retreating into the safety of silence. Michael, oblivious to the subtle warfare unfolding at the table, tried to bridge the gap by including me in conversations. He sang my praises, recounting how we met and how much he admired my dedication to my studies. His words only seemed to fuel Emma's disdain. By the time dessert was served, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. In the following weeks, Emma's hostility began to seep into the rest of the family dynamic. Her influence over their opinions became evident in the small ways they interacted with me. Invitations to family gatherings felt more obligatory than genuine, and conversations were tinged with an undercurrent of doubt. I could feel the distance growing, a chasm that widened with each passing day. Michael noticed the shift but seemed powerless to stop it. He chalked it up to his family adjusting to someone new, but I knew better. This was Emma's doing, and she was playing her game with masterful precision. Michael and I tried to address the issue head-on. We discussed ways to mend the rift, to show his family that I was more than the person Emma had painted me to be. But every effort seemed to backfire. Emma's influence was too strong, her manipulation too subtle for anyone to see clearly. It was like fighting a shadow. Every move I made only seemed to strengthen her position. The breaking point came during a family dinner when Emma's provocations escalated into outright confrontation. She accused me of being distant, of not making enough effort to connect with the family. Her words were dripping with faux concern, but the intent was clear. Michael's parents looked at me with questioning eyes, their trust in me eroded by Emma's insidious campaign. I turned to Michael for support, expecting him to stand by me, to defend me against the onslaught. But his hesitation spoke volumes. That night, our first real fight broke out. I couldn't hold back the frustration and hurt that had been building for weeks. I accused him of being blind to Emma's schemes, of failing to protect me when I needed him most. He tried to explain, to justify his inaction, but his words felt hollow. The bond we had built over months seemed to crack under the weight of our argument. In the end, I made the hardest decision of my life. I told Michael that I couldn't continue in a relationship where I was constantly fighting for acceptance, where his family's opinion carried more weight than my happiness. Walking away from him felt like tearing out a piece of my own heart, but I knew it was the only way to preserve my sense of self. As I closed the door on our relationship, I couldn't help but wonder if this was exactly what Emma had wanted all along. Starting over was not as liberating as I had hoped. After walking away from Michael and his family, I poured myself into work and hobbies, trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy. The mornings felt lonelier, the nights quieter, but I reminded myself that I had made the right decision. I deserved a life free from manipulation and constant judgment. Little did I know, life had another twist waiting for me. It was a regular Tuesday when I realized something was different. Fatigue that seemed out of place, emotions that ran too high, and then the missed cycle. A trip to the pharmacy and a small plastic test confirmed what my heart had already suspected. I was pregnant. The surge of emotions that followed was overwhelming: fear, joy, confusion, and an undeniable wave of love for the life growing inside me. But that joy was tempered by the reality of my situation. I was alone, and the father of my child was a man whose family had torn me apart. As the weeks went on, I kept the news to myself. I focused on preparing for my new life, balancing my emotions with a resolve to give my child the best start possible. Then, one afternoon, I ran into Michael's parents at the grocery store. I hadn't seen them since the breakup, and I could tell by their expressions that they hadn't expected to see me either. Their initial surprise quickly turned to recognition as their eyes drifted downward, noticing the subtle curve of my belly. The air between us was charged with an awkward tension that neither side knew how to break. They approached me cautiously, their expressions a mix of curiosity and something that looked like regret. I wasn't sure what to expect, but their tone was softer than I had anticipated. They asked how I was doing and whether I needed anything, their concerns seeming genuine. It was a stark contrast to the chilly indifference they had shown during my time with Michael. I left the encounter feeling unsettled, unsure of what to make of their sudden change in demeanor. A week later, Michael reached out. His message was careful, almost hesitant, asking if we could talk. I hesitated before responding, torn between my lingering feelings for him and the walls I had built to protect myself. Eventually, I agreed to meet him in a public space, determined to keep the interaction on neutral ground. When we met, Michael looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His eyes searched mine for answers, and his words were laced with regret. He apologized for not standing by me, for allowing Emma to manipulate the situation to the point of breaking us apart. He admitted that his parents had told him about our encounter at the grocery store and that they had pieced together the truth about Emma's behavior, both during our relationship and in the years prior. Despite his apologies, I struggled to let go of the hurt. Trust, once broken, is not easily repaired, and the wounds from his family's rejection still felt fresh. I told him about the pregnancy, watching as a mix of shock and determination crossed his face. He vowed to be there for me, to support both me and our child, but I couldn't bring myself to accept his promises outright. Actions would speak louder than words, and I needed time to see if he could truly change. In the meantime, Michael's parents began reaching out. At first, it was small gestures, a phone call to check in, a card left at my door. Then came the visit where they sat me down and admitted their mistakes. They confessed that they had always taken Emma at her word, never questioning the narrative she spun. But after our breakup, they had started noticing inconsistencies in her stories. It led them to re-examine the events of Michael's childhood and their own biases, which had clouded their judgment of me. Hearing their admission was bittersweet. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part mourned the time and peace we had all lost. They expressed their desire to mend the relationship and to be part of their grandchild's life, but I remained cautious. Trust would take time, and I wasn't ready to let them back in completely. Still, their efforts marked the beginning of a shift in the dynamic. Michael's determination to prove himself never wavered. He attended parenting classes, rearranged his work schedule to accommodate future responsibilities, and even sought counseling to address the underlying issues that had allowed Emma to manipulate him. Slowly, his actions began to align with his words, planting seeds of hope that perhaps we could find a way forward, not as we were, but as something stronger. Even as progress was made, the past lingered. The shadows of old wounds were ever present, but I held on to the belief that healing was possible. My priority remained my child, ensuring that they entered a world surrounded by love and stability. Whether or not Michael and I could rebuild our relationship, I was determined to create a future free from the toxicity that had defined my time with his family. And as I looked toward that future, I realized that strength came not from erasing the past, but from learning how to rise above it. Michael's persistence was unrelenting. Despite my initial resistance, he continued to reach out, determined to be a part of his son's life. Each message and visit was filled with a mix of hope and desperation, as if he was trying to piece together a fractured future. Eventually, I agreed to sit down and discuss the terms of shared custody. As much as I wanted to shield myself from further pain, I knew I couldn't deny my child the chance to know his father. The arrangement was delicate. We established a schedule that allowed Michael to be involved without encroaching too much on my life. To his credit, he adhered to it strictly, showing up for appointments, ultrasounds, and parenting classes. Watching him immerse himself in the responsibilities of fatherhood softened some of my reservations, but it didn't erase the lingering distrust I felt. Emma remained a thorn in my side. Her animosity didn't wane with time. If anything, it seemed to grow more fervent. She would find subtle ways to insert herself into situations, her words dripping with veiled hostility. During one particularly tense video call with Michael and his parents, she made a pointed remark about my son's parentage. Her tone was light, but the implication was unmistakable. My blood boiled, but before I could respond, Michael's father interjected, shutting her down with an uncharacteristic sternness. The moment was a turning point. The subtle but undeniable resemblance between my son and Michael had become more apparent as the pregnancy progressed. Michael's parents, who had once been swayed by Emma's manipulation, began to see through her facade. They started to question her intentions and the role she had played in driving a wedge between me and Michael. It wasn't long before the cracks in their relationship with her became irreparable. The decision to distance themselves from Emma wasn't an easy one for Michael's family. She had always been a dominant presence, wielding her charm and cunning to maintain control. But the truth had a way of surfacing, and the cumulative weight of her actions could no longer be ignored. Their decision to stand by me and support my son marked a significant shift in our dynamic. It was both vindicating and bittersweet, a reminder of the pain we had endured to reach this point. Michael's commitment never wavered. He became a constant presence, attending every doctor's appointment and preparing for our son's arrival with meticulous care. He transformed his apartment into a welcoming space, complete with a nursery that rivaled anything I could have put together. His actions spoke louder than any promises he could have made, gradually rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. As the weeks turned into months, the tension with Emma reached its breaking point. During a family gathering, she confronted Michael and his parents, accusing them of abandoning her and choosing sides. Her outburst revealed the depth of her resentment, but it also solidified their resolve. They made it clear that their loyalty lay with their grandchild and his well-being, a decision that left Emma fuming. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her, and from that day forward, her presence in their lives diminished. The absence of Emma's toxicity brought a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could see a future that wasn't clouded by conflict and doubt. Michael's family rallied around me, offering support and reassurance as my due date approached. Their actions didn't erase the pain of the past, but they went a long way in healing the wounds left behind. Despite the progress, life was far from perfect. The scars of our history lingered, a reminder of the challenges we had overcome. Co-parenting with Michael required constant communication and compromise, but it also brought moments of unexpected joy. Watching him hold our son for the first time, his eyes filled with wonder and love, reminded me of why I had fallen for him in the first place. It wasn't an easy road, but it was one worth traveling. Not for the sake of rekindling our romance, but for the family we were slowly piecing together. The day Michael and I exchanged vows felt surreal, like the culmination of a journey neither of us could have anticipated. We stood in a small, sunlit garden surrounded by a handful of loved ones, our son nestled comfortably in my mother's arms. The ceremony was simple, free from the pomp and grandeur of traditional weddings. It was a reflection of us, imperfect but determined, two people trying to forge a future out of the chaos of their past. Marrying Michael wasn't a decision I made lightly. It came after months of co-parenting, healing, and countless conversations about what we wanted for ourselves and our son. His unwavering dedication to being a father and his efforts to rebuild the trust he had broken were undeniable. Still, I made it clear that our marriage would be a partnership, one where my voice was equal and my boundaries were respected. After the wedding, we purchased a modest home on the outskirts of town. It was a fixer-upper, but the potential it held mirrored our own. Michael threw himself into making the house a home, painting walls, assembling furniture, and even planting a small garden in the backyard. Watching him interact with our son during these moments filled me with a sense of contentment I hadn't thought possible. He was a natural father, patient, attentive, and unafraid to embrace the messiness of parenthood. Despite the progress we had made, I chose to maintain some distance from Michael's family. While his parents had shown genuine remorse for their past actions and worked to build a healthier relationship with me, I knew my peace of mind required boundaries. I kept our interactions cordial but limited, focusing instead on nurturing the family Michael and I were building. The absence of Emma from their lives was a relief, a void that brought an unexpected sense of stability. Life settled into a rhythm, one filled with small joys and inevitable challenges. There were late nights soothing a teething baby, weekends spent at the park, and the occasional disagreement about whose turn it was to do the dishes. But through it all, there was a sense of partnership that hadn't existed before. We were a team, learning and growing together, united by our love for our son and our shared determination to create a better future. As I reflect on the journey that brought me here, I'm struck by how much I've changed. The girl who once let others dictate her worth has been replaced by a woman who knows her value. The trials I faced with Michael and his family didn't break me. They shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I learned the importance of setting boundaries, standing up for myself, and choosing forgiveness not as a weakness, but as a path to freedom. Michael and I are far from perfect, and our story is far from a fairy tale. But it's real, and it's ours. As I watch our son take his first tentative steps across the living room, his laughter filling the air, I feel a sense of fulfillment that words can't capture. Life will always have its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to face them, not just as an individual, but as part of a family we've fought hard to create. This is my new beginning, one built on lessons learned, bridges mended, and a resilience I didn't know I possessed. And as I look ahead, I'm reminded that strength isn't about avoiding hardship, but about finding the courage to rise above it, time and time again.